Hey everybody, today I am going to be ranking the 9 core Star Wars films from best to worst. And y'all thought I was done with these Star Wars videos, but no, I had to do a ranking video just because um, obviously I reviewed the 9 Star Wars films very recently, and it was my first time seeing them all together like that. It really puts things into perspective. And initially, before I had gone and reviewed these on Patreon, I did an initial ranking, just, my perceptions, what I remembered from the 9 films. And now that I've gone back and reviewed them all, that list has majorly changed. And I am going to start from the best film and go down to the worst one, just because, the best Star Wars films are, I think a lot of people agree on them. It's less interesting, and the further you go down, I think it gets more difficult because there's a lot of bad Star Wars films out there. But we will start with my number 1 Star Wars film, the best film, I think, of the entire Star Wars trilogy, and that is The Empire Strikes Back, and this is from what year was it? 1980? I think this is a near perfect film, truly. For what it is, I think it's near perfect. And I don't know, I just think it's the best one. I'm like, objectively, it is the best one. I swear to God. I think Kershner, who directed the film, I just think he created the perfect balance of all of the quintessential elements that are very Star Warsy. And not only did he make the best Star Wars film, but he made a really unexpected and very bold film that I think a lot of people were shocked by. And it is certainly the most important Star Wars film I think ever made, besides, of course, A New Hope. But with sequels, a lot is on the line. And with that particular film, I think it's the reason that the franchise continued. If it didn't work, then I think Star Wars would have just died. And whether or not you think that's a good thing or a bad thing that Star Wars became this Frankenstein monster, it did just, keep the story going in a certain way. But yeah, when I look at the film, I think the filmmaking is the most pronounced. I think it's all of the sequences, the battle sequences, the special effects, everything is so well orchestrated. Every moment, every beat lands. It feels like every action, every character motivation here, all of it matters, and it's all contributing to, something bigger. And yeah, it is dramatic in all of the right ways. It really goes so much further than A New Hope. And not only that, it subverts everything. I feel like that film is one big crescendo to success, and then The Empire Strikes Back is like going from success to failure. And yet somehow it still has a wonderful energy about it. As in, it doesn't get too heavy and weigh you down. There's always still that humor and that childlike nostalgic quality. And yeah, I just think some of the most emotionally resonant things from Star Wars are in this particular film, particularly the stuff with Yoda on the Dagobah system. I think that's some of the best stuff in Star Wars. So yeah, I don't know. I just think it's the most cinematic. I think it is the most ambitious and just the most, I think this is the one that truly becomes art. I think a lot of these films are more kind of commercial. Some of them are more kind of for marketing more than it is, the actual story. But this is actually kind of elevated filmmaking. Number 2, I'm going to go with Star Wars, the original Star Wars, or A New Hope as it was named later. And this came out in 1977. Obviously, it was directed by George Lucas. And when I watched that this most recent time to review it, it was a very, very strange sort of thing, particularly because, as I was watching it, I really enjoyed the second half of it. I think the second half just has such great humor and tension, and just everything is moving beautifully with such joy. And yet, I think in the first half, it felt maybe like it drags a little bit, feels maybe a little bit thin. It doesn't have the same impact for me as it did when I was a child. So some moments I think are really giving me chills and they're very emotional, and other moments, I don't think are quite as significant. And yeah, there is something about it that just does feel kind of very small scale compared to what it became later on. Certainly not as ambitious or resonant as The Empire Strikes Back, but it is I think a perfect encapsulation of how to write, a proper narrative. It is the hero's journey. And if you're wanting to learn how to write a script, this is a perfect movie to use as a template, as an easy model. There is just very little fat to trim. In this film, like in Empire Strikes Back, I think these are the 2 films that feel the most innocent, as in they're the most joyous. They're the ones that, they have less of an agenda. There's just a lot of passion and creativity going on here. I love moments like the binary sunset. I think that's a wonderful moment. The Battle of Yavin gives me chills, just because it's scary in a way to see just, how that sequence would change the way movies were made forever. And third, I'm going with Return of the Jedi. This film came out in 1983, and it was directed by Richard Marquand. And initially, when I had done this list, before I had gone and reviewed all 9 of them, I think I had Revenge of the Sith in this spot. But going back and watching them, I think for me, it was very clear that Return of the Jedi is the one to put in the third spot. Sure, I think of the original trilogy, it is the most flawed of them. It doesn't have the same kind of emotional impact. It's not nearly as dramatic. It feels quite disjointed just as a story. And, it feels like they didn't know what to do with a lot of the side characters here. And it is kind of tonally awkward at times as well. And it does feel very corporate. Like you can feel a lot of the like toy tie-ins and everything. This is when Star Wars is truly starting to become the industry. And you can feel it. It feels less like The Voice from the first two. Less of an honest sort of creativity and passion there. And yeah, I have to admit, I'm just not a big fan, and I think this is, common to say, but I'm not a big fan of the Ewoks being the ones to like in this battle. It just felt like a Lost Boys battle or something from like Hook, where they're beating pirates with like arts and crafts projects and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't mind the lighter tone of this one. A lot of times third films are gonna be lighter compared to a more heavy, darker entry. I just wish it were more resonant, and I wish it had that Kirshner kind of quality to it. I love the stuff with the Emperor. I think that is what saves the film. It is the Emperor, and it's Luke's story as well. I think it's a very satisfying conclusion for him. And that triangle between, the Emperor and Darth Vader and Luke, all of that stuff is very compelling and very emotionally resonant for sure. And I like the way everything concludes. It feels like a proper ending, which, we don't get a lot of those these days. Next, I'm going to go with Revenge of the Sith, and this came out in 2005. It was directed by George Lucas, of course, and I'm putting this one here. I'm not a big fan of the film. I don't hate it by any means, but I'm not a big fan of it, mainly because I see the potential for what it could have done. This is such a big risk of a film, just in terms of the content in it. It's an incredibly integral episode when we're looking at just the rise and fall of Anakin Skywalker. And so because of that, it's like all of the juicy stuff is going to be in this one. And a lot of emotions obviously are at stake. And that's the thing. I think this film has a lot of really compelling ideas in it. I just think that they're really, really poorly executed. And unfortunately, that ruins a lot of the experience for me. I certainly felt the emotions at time, which was something I desperately needed after watching the first two prequels. And it's questioning a lot of the ideas about the Force and the Sith in ways that I've always wanted Star Wars to do. But like just the whole film, it just looks so terrible from an aesthetic standpoint, and the writing of it. Everything is very chaotic, and it feels very much like a Spike TV original movie, as I said in the review, but it is certainly way, way better than the other two prequels. And it does have, I think, a satisfying conclusion somewhat. I think it really kind of transitions us very well into A New Hope, but it's just not right. The taste levels aren't there, and I needed that in order for this film to really, impact me. Next, I'm going with The Phantom Menace, and this film obviously came out in 1999, directed by George Lucas. Of course it sucks. Everyone knows it sucks. I said it sucks when I reviewed it, and I do think ultimately it is kind of a waste of an episode. I really think ideally they should have taken the Revenge of the Sith story and separated that into the 3 episodes, and that would have been the perfect prequel trilogy, so we could really draw out that story. But they didn't, and because of it, it all feels very chaotic. But with this movie, as bad as it is, I do think there are some good qualities about it. And I did mention that. I don't really mind watching it. Maybe it's more the nostalgia of it, but yeah, I don't know. When it comes to like aesthetics and just a lot of the world building, a lot of the creature design and like the spaceships, everything, I think it's easily the best of the prequels. It just feels like they tried more with this one. I guess maybe it's the anticipation for this particular episode was so huge because it had been 20 years since we had seen a Star Wars film. So the marketing and the costumes and just the effort, how expensive it was, it feels expensive. I think it's more cinematic. The filmmaking is better. It's still terrible filmmaking, but honestly, compared to the other prequels, I think this is some of the best. I'm not talking about necessarily from a narrative standpoint, but just a lot of the sequences here, I think they're built more with just a little more coherence and a little bit more tension. They give these set pieces a little bit more room to breathe, and they don't feel quite as random from just a creative standpoint. And some of those things do resonate because we're not just drowning fully in CGI just yet. It is a very low bar, but like I look at the pod race sequence, I thought that was fantastic. Absolutely Star Wars, and it builds well, it looks expensive, it's creative. And I did kind of enjoy that it had like a really cheesy, like 1950s epic Cinerama movie quality to it, very old Hollywood. And I don't know, that was just appealing to me on a certain level. So I don't know, I can get a kick out of it from a certain standpoint. Next, number 6, I'm going with Attack of the Clones, directed by George Lucas again, and I don't know, man. I have always hated this particular entry of the prequels the most. I just think it is the worst writing. It is so cringy. And I just think, making a love story the center of a Star Wars film is a big mistake just because, it is already so stilted and there's no sex in Star Wars. It's one of the least erotic films out there. And this one feels like it was written by an 11-year-old girl. It is just really embarrassing, and the cringe just weighs very heavily on you as you're watching it. Some say it's a so good, it's bad type of experience, but I feel that more with Phantom Menace. For me, this is just bad. It's because nothing resonated with me. It's like, even when things are bad, I like there to be something eccentric or a little charming about it, and this just didn't do it for me. I've just felt really embarrassed watching this one, and seeing Yoda fight Count Dooku and whip out the lightsaber and all of that, for me, that's the moment that Star Wars died. Next, I'm going with The Last Jedi, and this is directed by Rian Johnson. It came out in 2017. We're on number 7 now, I believe. And I know a lot of people think that this is the worst Star Wars film of all time. And I see what you're saying. And I do agree with you. I think of all of the 9, this is the one that hurts the most. Like it aches my heart. In a lot of ways, you could look at this as one of the more ambitious entries. It's certainly one of the more meta Star Wars films, and it is one of the more subversive Star Wars films ever, for sure. And it's definitely really going for kind of gutting the original Star Wars legacy, the original Star Wars story. And I admit a lot of those ideas are very intriguing and I'm compelled by them on paper, and yet this just failed in nearly every way when it comes to the actual execution of it. You just can't make these bold claims and do all of this stuff without thinking it through. If you're going to be bold and if you're going to be brave, it helps to not look really stupid and careless and sloppy when you're doing it, because you're going to lose your audience that way, and it also just makes you look worse. Even though this film is so stunning to look at, and just like the imagery in it is some of the best in any Star Wars film, I think it's ultimately just an offensive train wreck. I can't decide if it's just a really bold concept that failed miserably, or if it's just one elaborate practical joke. In a way, I think it's kind of a combination of the two. But there was just something really brutal about it, and it really left me speechless in ways that none of the other films did, and I think part of it is just how it tears apart the mythology of the Skywalkers and just that style of storytelling with such coldness. It's fascinating. Number 8 is The Force Awakens, directed by J.J. Abrams. And this one really made me mad. And I know that maybe Last Jedi should have made me more mad, but for some reason this one just really got under my skin. I think it's because this is the one film where all the reasons to watch it come from outside the film, as my friend said who watched the film with me. There's really no reason for this film to exist, way more than, say, the prequels. As an example, just because the Skywalker story ended and, it's got a neat and tidy bow on it, and there's really nothing to probe beyond that. So the whole plot here is meaningless, and it's just there for a cash grab. It's already empty even before the film has begun. And the stakes are basically non-existent for these characters. It is people just masquerading as lesser versions of great characters. There's just this creepy desperation in this film compared to The Last Jedi, which I think had, some interesting things about it, at least to keep me compelled. And this film, I think, just stands for everything wrong with Hollywood and how there's just no originality anymore in a film like this. And I'm just so shocked at how things like this can get made, because I barely consider this even a film. Like I said in my review, it feels like a curtain call at like a fan expo. It is just nothing but empty references, winks at the audience. It's just, fan service being shoved down your throat ad nauseum. And it's amazing that you can follow the beats of the original film and yet manage to fuck it up just this badly. And I don't know, I find this just to be deeply offensive to my intelligence, and I just see it as truly evil. And number 9, what I think is the worst Star Wars film of all time, and quite frankly, I think it's one of just the worst movies I have ever seen in my life. That would be The Rise of Skywalker, which came out in 2019. And when I mentioned that, The Force Awakens feels like trying to revive a dead corpse, this feels more like we are putting it on puppet strings and forcing it to dance. I know I said that in my review, but really, that image for me encapsulates what this film is all about. If I had to recommend this film to somebody, I would only recommend it to people who have attention spans that are about 1.2 seconds, and even that is kind of pushing it, I think. I might recommend this film to the guy from Memento who has the short-term memory loss because he just won't remember it. And for as ADD as this movie is, then I would just think it wouldn't be a problem. But yeah, it's hard for me to understand how anybody could like this film and how anybody could understand this film. Please, if you understand the plot to this, you're a genius. Honestly, I'm just really overwhelmed by how bad it is, to the point where I often don't even really know what to say about it, because it's like, people are like, why didn't you like it? I'm like, well, I don't even know where to begin. But it is some of the dumbest shit you've ever seen. At least Force Awakens had an actual story, like a beginning, middle, and end. This one, I could not find much of that at all. It's just a tornado of material. It is, I know it's gross, but really, when I think of Star Wars, this is the diuretic explosion of it. And it's sad because The Last Jedi really sabotaged the third one in terms of how it could possibly be cohesive. But I don't think that the film was unsalvageable, and yet they managed to fail so hard. And it's creepy and condescending the way they just tried to pretend like The Last Jedi never happened, and they just try to resume the way things were before, but you just can't do that, and it all comes out in the wash. It's insane. It is like Star Wars became this really twisted and demented monster like Akira or something, and you're like, oh my God, what have I done? That's the feeling I get watching Rise of Skywalker. It feels like a horror film to me. It's honestly more terrifying than most of the horror films I've ever seen. Even just the idea of reviving the corpse of Palpatine. It's like, well, that gives you all you need to know. But yeah, those are the 9 and how I rank them from best to worst. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who disagree with me. Totally cool. But I would like to know from you guys how you would rank them. So go ahead, rank the 9. It'd be interesting to see the results there. But that is the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits and I sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Guys, thank you so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.